Hey guys, so I am a 27-year-old male, have been living with my in-laws for the past 3 weeks now. My wife, a 25-year-old female, and I have been married for 3 years and she's 8 months pregnant now. She wanted her family to move in to help her out since on maternity leave right now, but I still had to work, and she didn't want to be home alone all day, so I agreed that she definitely did need someone to stay with her at home. She'd told me that she was going to invite her family over to live with her until the baby was born. But I hadn't exactly been comfortable with that idea, so I'd tried to convince her to invite only her mother. I don't like that woman one bit, but she was my wife's mom, so I was willing to put up with her for a while for my wife's sake. But she insisted that she wanted her entire family living with her, so I had to give in to it eventually. So, 3 weeks ago, her parents and 2 younger siblings, her brother aged 22 and her sister aged 18, all moved into our house. I'm very thankful that my parents let me live in their house after I got married. They moved out of the city and live on the outskirts of the city with my uncle now. They're all retired and run a B&B for a living. After my in-laws moved in, my wife took over the shared bedroom entirely, and my mother-in-law insisted that she sleep in our bedroom as well since she has a bad back. My father-in-law mostly stays in the guest room. My sister-in-law sleeps on the pull-out couch in the living room, and my brother-in-law sleeps on a mattress on the living room floor. Because of the sleeping arrangement, I've been forced to confine myself to my childhood bedroom, and I was not happy about this at all. My wife is pregnant, and I really wanted to be there by her side whenever she went into labor, which could be any time now according to her OB/G. But instead it's my mother-in-law who's going to be there first, and I'll admit, I did resent her for it. My wife has always been very close to her family, but I didn't think she needed her entire family to move in for her pregnancy, and felt this was a bit excessive. But since she was really pregnant and emotional, I didn't argue with her and let her have it her way. I knew that my wife wanted them around because her family's presence comforted her. And if that's what my 8-month pregnant wife wanted, then I wouldn't deny her that. But unfortunately, the past 3 weeks were incredibly difficult for me because her family are not the easiest people to live with. Her siblings are really lazy and constantly need to be reminded to clean up after themselves, and my mother-in-law just keeps nitpicking everything that we own and has made it a habit of complaining about my parents' taste in furniture and colors since she didn't approve of the way my childhood home had been done up by my parents. The only person who wasn't much trouble to deal with was my father-in-law, who mostly restricted himself to the guest room and didn't come out for anything except for meals. I will be blunt. I didn't mind my wife's siblings or her father, but I did mind my mother-in-law since she had been exceptionally rude and crass ever since she'd moved in. Her nitpicking got on my nerves, and the way she'd speak badly about my parents' taste was annoying because they'd been kind enough to let us have such a spacious house with the furniture for free. In this economy, a house like this would have cost my wife and me a fortune, since it was really big and was located in a nice neighborhood as well. I don't even want to think of the price had it been pre-furnished like ours. But I was still willing to put up with all of this simply because my wife wanted these people by her side, and that's all that mattered to me. So I let them stay and tried to stay out of any unnecessary drama as far as possible. I can't count the number of times I've had to bite my tongue in the past 3 weeks, but I finally could no longer take it and forced all of them to get the hell out 2 days ago. I'd left for work like every other day in the morning, and my wife had also been out with my mother-in-law for a routine checkup. My sister-in-law was on winter break and had decided to spend the day with a couple of her friends. The only people at home were my father-in-law and my brother-in-law because everyone else would be out. About half an hour away from home, I realized that I'd left my laptop back at home and had brought along my wife's laptop instead. I wouldn't get any work done without it anyway, since all the files I needed were on my company's laptop, so I was forced to go back. And I'm really thankful that I forgot the laptop, because once I got home I realized that something really fishy was going on. I walked into a completely empty living room, which was weird because the couch was usually occupied by my brother-in-law or my sister-in-law or both. But I didn't have time to worry about that, so I decided to walk back to my room instead. There I found my brother-in-law sitting with his back to the door and using my laptop. He's very into tech stuff, and I knew that if he was using my laptop, it couldn't be for a good cause, so I confronted him, but he refused to tell me what exactly he'd been up to, and I'm not very tech-savvy myself, so I couldn't tell what he'd been doing either. I told him that I'd call the cops if he didn't tell me, and he seemed to be a little intimidated by that, so he confessed that he'd been copying all my data from my laptop to a pen drive that he'd then give to my wife. He'd already done so with my phone a few days back while I was asleep, but getting a hold of my laptop had been a little tricky since it was always either in my room or with me in the office. So my wife had swapped it for her own this morning, hoping that I wouldn't realize until the work was done. But unfortunately, I'd realized midway and had come back home sooner than expected. He tried to explain that he hadn't been on board with this since it was unethical and a gross invasion of my privacy. But my wife had actually paid him to do this for her. I was shocked that my wife had done such a thing, and luckily she came back home from her appointment with her doctor within half an hour of my return. She knew as soon as she saw my face and her brother's face that she'd messed up and immediately dragged me to her room to talk to me in person. Her mother stood there in the corner, sulking and glaring at my brother-in-law, so I knew that she was definitely involved in this somehow, and I turned out to be right as well. My wife apologized for going behind my back first and foremost, but then she confessed that she'd been trying to spy on me, and that's why she'd asked her brother to copy everything he found on my devices so that she could go through it all and check if there was anything suspicious that I'd been hiding. I was incredibly insulted and asked her why exactly she'd done such a thing, because as far as I was concerned, I'd never shown any interest in any other women, and neither did I ever indicate that I was bored with my marriage. I loved my wife, and I thought she loved me too. So I couldn't understand for the life of me why she had felt the need to spy on me all of a sudden. I was furious and couldn't keep my cool, which she did realize from my voice. I'd already been struggling to keep my temper under control because of how my in-laws had been getting on my very last nerve, and this was just the last straw for me. So I kind of blew up at her, and she ended up breaking down into tears afterward. I obviously felt guilty, because I didn't intend to make my pregnant wife cry, and felt like a total jerk for doing so. So then I tried to comfort her, and while I held her hands, she told me why exactly she'd done something like this. And just as I'd suspected, this was all my mother-in-law's fault. For the past 3 weeks, at night, her mother had been warning her about how men tend to cheat on their wives if they get too big while they're pregnant, and she needs to lose some weight as soon as she has the baby because her mother believes that my wife is too big in spite of the fact that she's 8 months pregnant. For days, she'd been reminding her that she needed to eat less to look attractive, or else I'd inevitably end up looking for love somewhere else. This woman had been filling my wife's head with all sorts of bullcrap about how she was getting too big and making her feel insecure every damn day. This is what would go on in her head before going to bed, and her emotions were already in overdrive due to the hormonal changes, so she ended up doing something really stupid and paid her brother to hack into my devices to make sure her mother wasn't right, and I wasn't actually cheating. She hadn't had the opportunity of going through anything yet, and she was practically requesting me not to leave her over this after she explained her reasons to me. I felt horrible, not just because my wife had felt compelled to do this and had suspected me of cheating, but also because I knew exactly why my mother-in-law had been doing this. My wife's family is mostly on the skinnier side, and their women are really petite, as they say. My wife, however, is kind of tall, well-built, and on the curvier side. Now, to most people this would seem attractive, but it's always been an insecurity for her. My wife had told me about her complicated relationship with food, her body, and her mother in the initial years of our relationship. Growing up, her mother was an almond mom who believed that strictly monitoring my wife's portions and making sure she ate way less than what was required of her would ensure that she doesn't grow up to be a fat cow, which is what she used to refer to my wife when she was in her teens and had gained a lot of weight. Her mom's strict diet regimes had led to an eating disorder which was inevitable because my mother-in-law was obsessed with how her daughter's body looked and didn't want it to appear unseemly in the slightest, and by unseemly I mean chubby, which my wife naturally is. It's God-given and I don't mind it. Heck, I don't even give a damn about it because I love my wife for who she is, not because of her body or because I find her attractive, which I do, but there's way more to her as a person than I love and admire. My wife did manage to lose a lot of weight in college, since she was then living away from her mother, and was finally able to build a healthier relationship with food and exercise, and she's stayed at the same weight since then, more or less. She's tried her best to win over her mother, and I used to think that things have changed, but clearly not. Her mother was still the same awful person, and it's unlikely that she was even capable of changing anymore. Even while her own daughter was pregnant, she kept pushing her to lose weight, which is insane because my wife's literally growing another human being inside her. In fact, their visit to the doctor was regarding her weight because her mother believed that she was too fat and was overeating again. She told me that she'd been really stupid and was sobbing while telling me not to leave her and promise to lose weight. That's how hysterical she was. Not being able to bear it anymore, I decided to give her a comforting hug to calm her down. I told her that I didn't care about how much she weighed and that I just wanted her to be happy and healthy, which seemed to pacify her a bit. I told her to stay in her room and then left to force my in-laws to leave because I'd seen enough. I couldn't take this anymore, and there was no way in hell I was letting my mother-in-law near my wife again. So I told them to leave, and my father-in-law and brother-in-law were ready to go. But it was as expected my mother-in-law who kicked up a fuss and refused to leave, saying that this was her daughter's house and she didn't need my permission to live here. I reminded her that this was actually the house that I'd inherited from my parents, whom she seemed to hate, and so she could either leave on her own or I'd be glad to call the cops and have her escorted away. After some arguing, my father-in-law finally forced her to leave with him. Since then, I've been spending all my time at home with my wife and reassuring her that she'll be just fine because that episode had taken a toll on her. I can't imagine why a mother would put her own child through such emotional turmoil, especially when they're pregnant and already going through so much. But that's the kind of woman my mother-in-law is, and she even had the audacity to text me yesterday and demand that I let her move back in so that she can take care of my wife. I was livid when I read that, and in the heat of the moment, I told her that she'd be lucky if I ever even let her around my wife or baby in the future ever again. Having said that, I blocked her, but this morning my father-in-law, who's a usually silent man, called me up and told me that I owe my mother-in-law an apology because she's been inconsolable since last night. She can't bear the thought of being separated from her daughter and her future grandkid, and insists that she only wants the best for us. Am I the a-hole for refusing to let my mother-in-law see my wife after she'd been forcing her to feel bad about her body while she was 8 months pregnant? Update 1. Hey everybody. So first of all, thanks to everyone who commented on the original post. My heart truly goes out to everyone out there who's had to face similar experiences. I really can't imagine how awful it must have been for you guys, but I truly and genuinely hope that someday you guys are able to move past the trauma of being shamed and harassed just for your body type. I truly wish that for everyone. My wife's been doing a lot better now that we've gone completely no contact with her family, and it's been close to a week since we last heard from any of them. She hadn't even wanted her family to come live with her in the first place, but her mother had forced her to arrange that evil old hag. Not only had she driven her nuts during her stay here, but she'd been bothering my wife since the beginning of her pregnancy and nagging at her about her weight constantly. I felt guilty because this thing with her mother had totally slipped my mind, and I was just focused on providing a safe space for her and the baby during the pregnancy, and had forgotten to consider other factors like my dear mother-in-law. My wife told me that she'd been feeling really insecure about her body once again now that she was living with her mother. And that's what had made her act so crazy and suspicious, but she was over it now, and promised to never do something so weird ever again. But honestly, I was more worried about her and her mental health. I'd forgiven the whole situation with her brother and what she'd made him do because that was just her being overly emotional and paranoid thanks to all the bullcrap that her mother had been saying. I told her that she could eat all that she wanted to, and it literally was nobody else's business but her own. I also informed her about what I'd said to her mother when she'd texted me a few days back, and she said that I'd done the right thing, even though she doesn't want to see her again, and I'm not about to let it happen, either because that woman is literally the devil incarnate. She'd made my wife's life a living hell, and I wouldn't even have let her set foot into my house had it not been for my wife's insistence. That had been a huge mistake, but at least I know better now and am not about to let that happen again. If she needs any help at all before or after the baby is born, we'll get in touch with trained professionals because clearly her family is not a go-to option for us anymore like it had been earlier. And while I'd love to have my parents involved, I'm not about to bother them since they love their peaceful life on the outskirts. They've promised me to come visit when my wife goes into labor since they're only a 3-hour drive away, but I'm not going to bother them before that day comes. For now, I'm working from home and trying to make up for lost time with my wife since she'd really been through a rough patch, and I'm making sure she's eating enough as well. I really hope things go smoothly for us from now onwards because I don't think either of us is mentally equipped to deal with more hiccups, not at such a late stage in the pregnancy at least. My wife's due in a couple of weeks and I just want these last few weeks to be just as smooth sailing as it had been earlier. Update 2. So my mother-in-law decided to make a reappearance just as we'd started to think that we'd managed to get rid of her. It's been close to 10 days since I kicked her out, and this morning, my wife and I woke up to someone banging on the door and screaming their head off. She recognized her mother's voice and instantly demanded that we call the cops, which we did, and within half an hour they'd come by and escorted her off our property, but it didn't end there. Even after the cops had taken her away, she decided to continue trying to contact us, and even involved our next-door neighbors by demanding that they pass on a message to us. Our neighbor is a single woman in her late 40s, and it was pretty awkward for her, but she told us that my mother-in-law had come by a few minutes ago, handed her a note, and told her to pass it on to us. The note was for my wife, and it said that she needed to leave me and go back to her family so that her mother could look after her, or else she'd be really disappointed in my wife. Well, good for my wife that she's an adult woman and doesn't need to be looked after by someone like her. I don't know if I did the right thing or not, but I crumpled that note up and tossed it in the bin where it belongs without even reading it to my wife, and she didn't ask about the contents of it either. I told my wife that things had gone far enough and we needed to start thinking about legal action against her, and she agreed. So we've decided to file for a restraining order against her because, after everything that's happened so far, I can't think of a single conceivable way that can end happily for all of us with her still being a part of our lives. I just cannot envision her in our future anymore. Maybe if the rest of her family apologizes, then I still might consider it, but not her mother. That woman has put my wife through hell and back throughout her childhood, her teenage years, and now even during pregnancy. I made the mistake of letting her into my wife's life once, but I'm not about to make that same mistake yet again. Update 3. Hey everybody. So I'm here after almost a month, and a lot of things have happened since my last update here. My wife and I are parents to a wonderful baby girl now, and trust me, we're going to do a way better job as parents than what my in-laws did. My wife is already an excellent mother, and I'm trying to be a good father as well. Part of that was making sure my mother-in-law had no access to her grandchild, so we managed to get a restraining order against her for 2 years, a few weeks before my wife gave birth. Her mother was hysterical when she was served and contacted a bunch of people, including my parents, a couple of our friends, one of my wife's cousins, and other relatives of hers, so that at least one of them would put her through to my wife. But all of them knew how terrible our relationship with her was now, so they were wise enough not to contact us on her behalf. They did tell us about the calls, but we didn't care. A few weeks after that, my wife finally went into labor, and after almost 18 hours, we had our daughter with us. It was crazy that we were finally parents, and it was very emotional for us. I could tell that my wife was very upset a few hours after birth that nobody else from her family had bothered to show up, or even asked her how she'd been doing for the past couple of weeks, and I was worried that this would put her at risk for postpartum depression. So I got in touch with a counselor as soon as I could, and convinced my wife to start seeing a mental health professional so that she wouldn't have to feel like she was taking on the world all by herself. Luckily, she did heed my advice, and has been doing online sessions with the guy I put her in touch with, and I'm hoping it makes her feel better. Apart from all of that, we're seriously having the time of our life with our daughter, and I hope that she grows up to be just as wonderful a human being as her mother is, if not more. My parents are going to visit in a week or two. They've had to postpone their visit since my uncle fell sick, but I'm actually kind of glad to have this time with my family. It's just the 3 of us right now, and I feel so at peace with everything when I'm around my 2 loves. I don't mean to gush, but this just feels like our family is complete now.